the regulations might be in the Health Act?
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I don't want to read anybody's minds, but I wouldn't be surprised if something around mandatory vaccinations. But I have to say, if you look around the world, I mean, in the UK, Boris Johnson just said basically all restrictions in England are going away from Thursday. People won't have to isolate. And I think in the UK, I'm open to correction, but I don't think they've had mask mandates for a couple of months now. It's up to you if you want to wear a mask. As far as I know, they're going to recommend that private businesses can still ask people for their NHS pass, which is proof that you've been vaccinated, but they're going to recommend that private businesses stop doing that actually from the 1st of April, I believe. So I think I think things are kind of changing around the world. We've also seen lots of resistance in other places to, the kind of these draconian health laws and so on. I mean, okay, we all know what's happening in Canada at the moment, and I think we've seen in certain places in the US, lots of Western Europe. There's also been pushback against it, and as I said, we've seen what's happened in the UK now. Even though the rules in Scotland are a bit different, but England is dropping, as I say, basically all COVID rules. So I think this might also get pushed back against, and we've seen. As I say, that the government and the ANC, when they do see there's public resistance to a thing, as Aaron said, they push back and they'll leave it. I think a very good example was the curfew. We had curfew until about the 30th of December this year. And then on the 29th or 30th or whenever it was, they came out and said, cool, no, there's no more curfew. And I think because the government knew that basically everybody who wanted to go jolling on the 31st was going to go jolling. Nobody was going to stay at home and make sure they're going to be home at midnight. Unlike the previous year, at the end of 2020, where I think a lot of people were happy to follow the rules. Maybe not happy, but they understood, okay, cool, there's a curfew. Let's follow the rules. If we want to go have a party, let's go to somebody's house. We're not out, and what have you. And I think the government knew people have had it up to, there's lockdown fatigue. And I mean, we can see from the numbers at the end of December, there wasn't really a wave in South Africa. And as far as I know from what I've read, I think even the government itself has said the South Africans have about 80% or 80% of South Africans are immune to COVID now, whether from the being vaccinated or from previous infections or whatever the case is. So yeah, I think there's quite a good chance that there actually won't be anything put under the new Health Act, under Health Act, but it's something we definitely got to watch. And I think as it stands now, there's probably a good chance that none of these regulations will be made permanent, but the people need to push back against it, and people need to support the allies. And because if that doesn't happen, then it could be possible that things like masks and being forced to quarantine against your will, or mandatory vaccines do become actual law in South Africa in the long run.
Yeah, well, look, it's no doubt that each one of your organizations do make a difference. I wanted to have someone from Sakhalich as well on here, but unfortunately couldn't make it happen because they've also been fighting against the state disaster and have done some. They recently got some good news as well. So, but either way, my point is all these organizations that are fighting for us, I think, is where it's at, because you guys fight on the legal front, and even though it takes a long time, it's still, I think, what really works. And then added to that, public pressure with protests and other things happening. Speaking of which, I worry that if there is mandatory vaccines, Rob, I'd like to get your opinion on this. That we could see more outcry. We could see something like we saw in July again, and do you think the ANC realizes this and they're scared of it, or do you think they might actually favor it?
It's a difficult question to answer because there's so many different factors at play here, and one of those really important factors is the establishment of the vaccine manufacturing plant in South Africa. I think that's going to play a major role in whether the ANC decides to introduce mandatory vaccinations or not. There's considerable investment in that plant, and the idea is to push the vaccines from South Africa, from that manufacturing plant throughout Africa, through the African Union, of course, of which Cyril Ramaphosa is the chairperson of. So if you bring in all of those external factors, then in the back of my mind it says we are going to see some sort of mandatory vaccination, or mandatory vaccinations in some sort of form because of the financial investment. However, we've seen unions stand up, we've seen taxi associations stand up and say there's no way you're going to introduce it. So from a political point of view, I think it would be a suicide move for the ANC to actually do that. By the time they get it right, we'll be approaching elections. So it will be really a political mistake if they do that. So I'm torn between will they do it or will they not? I think we just have to wait it out and see. But that doesn't mean we should stand back and expect them not to do it. I think we should always err on the side of caution and say, worst case scenario is they do introduce it. Let's put measures in place. Let's put precautions in place, and let's take the action now as a preventative measure in case it does happen.
Yeah, I think Ernst, I would like to get your opinion on that as well, because you guys obviously, you're an analyst yourself. You look at the landscape of South Africa, if I can put it that way. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I'd like to add to something that Marius said, and that is, if you look at the broader picture, this whole biocontrol state narrative is falling apart. All these countries, Norway, Austria, in England, all these European countries are abandoning their COVID policies. They're bringing them to an end. They're pretty much saying, well, pandemic's over. And they don't seem to be indicating that they are going to be going back to many of these policies. So I think if the ANC were to try now to reinstate many of these draconian measures, they would stick out like a sore thumb compared to other countries where things are calming down now, where governments are pulling back. I think the little bit of goodwill that many governments had has completely dried up. A good example would be in Canada. I don't think many of these draconian policies in Canada are going to last much longer with the type of resistance that you're seeing there now. But you can see how goodwill has been completely just depleted in a country like that. And then you have these countries condemning other countries for their authoritarian measures. And then you have people being trampled by police horses and people's bank accounts being frozen. It's horrific stuff. But that's what many of these Western countries have devolved into. That's what happens when you just start getting high on your own supply, and you start really just thinking, well, I'm in too deep now. It's almost like a sunken cost fallacy that many of these governments and politicians and leaders subscribe to, where the sunken cost fallacy basically states that you argue that I've sunk so much money into this business, I can't quit now. I can't close the business now. I've put so much money into it, and you just keep losing money. And that's what we're seeing with many of the COVIDians and people still championing a lot of these absurd policies all across the world. Is that firstly, on an individual level, they've built their personalities around supporting and defending and white knighting for these policies. So when those policies aren't there anymore, what are they going to do then with their time? They can't debate people online about that anymore. They're going to have to find something else. And then you see politicians and leaders and political figures that have bet their reputations on these policies. They've put all their chips on them. So these policies going away and a lot of them being exposed as useless is not going to be good for them. So they're going to hold on to them as long as they can. But I will predict one last thing, one final thought. I predict in a few years there's going to be a surge in people that are going to look back at these past 2 years and are going to say, I never supported that. I was always against it. I never supported X, Y, and Z. I saw right through it.
And you're talking about Nicholas Bauer.
Their old tweets. People are going to bring up their old tweets, and then they're going to see, well, no, you were actually driving around looking for people outside their flats that you can report them to the authorities. But there's going to be a lot of that type of denialism very soon, of people pretending like they were always opposing these types of policies. That's definitely something I can see on the horizon.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And most of them will be journalists, I reckon.
Yeah, there always are. They'll act like oh no, I was part of the good fight this entire time, guys. But yeah, the internet is forever. All right, so I'm gonna shift the conversation a little bit, seeing as I got you guys here. I think where we all stand now is like we just got to see what the ANC does. You guys are ready. You guys are prepared. You know the possibilities, if I can say that, of where they can go. But as long, or at least until you see what the ANC does, you're just gonna lie a bit in wait and see what happens. Am I correct? It's pretty much everyone's, yeah.